Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are beginning our Expression Tool Expedition. Now, that is not just a clever alliteration, but actually an apt description of what's involved with the Expression Tool because it is fairly vast, covers a lot of ground, a lot of elements can be found in the Expression Tool, and there's a ton of options available for positioning and playback and all that stuff. So this tutorial series will be a little on the long side, but I think it's well worth it because the Expression Tool is one of the most powerful tools of Finale, and I think if you have a firm grasp of how to use it, you'll be well on your way to conquering Finale just with that one knowledge of that one tool alone. So now, what can be found with the expression tool? First of all, the expression tool in the main tool palette is the thing that looks like a mezzo forte. So that's our expression tool, and basically anything that you see that's green in my score is an expression. So that includes things like dynamics and tempo marks, rehearsal marks, these crescendo marks. There's also tempo alterations, the poco ral up there on the top right. As well as things like technique text, like the arco. All of these are expressions, and essentially what they are, by Finale's definition, is an expression is any item, either a text or a symbol, that gets attached to a single horizontal position in a measure. Now, this has important implications because you can attach an element sort of to a beat or a rhythmic position in the measure, but you can also attach it to other parts of the measure, like the right or left bar line. You can attach it to the time signature, which is what the tempo text by default gets attached to. And then they also get attached either below or above the staff, depending on how they are set up. So there's a ton of flexibility with just position alone, and then there's a lot of options available for playback with expressions as well. And like I said, generally it will be a text item, but it can also be a music symbol because, as we know in Finale, every music symbol is essentially a font character. So you can actually use the font characters as text expressions. And this is important sometimes for very specific positionings. Like, for example, if you want to put a fermata over the right bar line, it makes more sense to create that as a text expression because there is a positioning available for expressions that would put it directly over the right bar line, which is kind of handy. But I will get into all of this later, particularly when we start talking about the expression designer. But for now, let's do some simple things with the expression tool. Now, when you're in the expression tool, you will get a crosshair similar to the smart shapes or the articulation crosshairs that has the arrow, and that arrow will always point towards the staff that you are about to attach it to. So just do be aware that if you're between staffs, you have to kind of be conscious of which way the arrow is pointing, and because that is where the expression will get attached. So in this case, the arrow is pointing towards flute 1, so let's double click, and that will pull up the expression selection dialog box. Now from here, when I choose an element, I can choose the mezzo forte, for example, and click assign. You'll see that the mezzo forte gets added. Before I go too much further, though, I do want to kind of give you a quick tour around this expression selection dialog box. Most notably, on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of categories. Now, these categories are important, for the primary reason. It makes it easier to find things. For example, you could actually show all here, and this will show you all of your expressions in one window. And particularly as you start adding expression, this gets fairly cumbersome to find things. But just select dynamics, you'll be able to find your dynamics, tempo marks, etc. So that function alone for categories is really handy. But the more important function is that all of these categories have very specific font and positioning characteristics to it. So, for example, all of the dynamics within the dynamics category will get placed below the staff, and actually there's a subtle positioning functionality for these dynamics where they will get placed below the staff, and if the notes get too low, the dynamics will actually go lower with the notes too. So tempo marks will always get placed above the staff. Same with tempo alterations. Expressive text will go below. Technique text will go above. Rehearsal marks will go above. And then miscellaneous will go sort of wherever you click. So there's a lot of different positioning and font differences. For example, the expressive text, you'll see these are all italicized and the technique texts are not. So the texts are part of the categories as well. And then one more important distinction about these categories, 3 of these categories, tempo marks, tempo alterations, and rehearsal marks. Those 3 categories specifically encompass what Finales considers system text expressions. And the system text expressions, basically what this means is that these expressions, when they get added to a score, will get placed above a certain staff in the score, but then also get placed on every staff within the parts. So for example, the tempo text, you wouldn't want to see the tempo on every single staff in the score because that wouldn't look right. But what you do want is you want it to appear on the top of the score, but also on every part. So that's what's allowing these system expressions to function. There's very specific ways to change that too. So the tempo expressions don't always have to go only on the top. In fact, in this score, I do have the tempo listed above the strings as well. So you can set those categories up in those ways. There's a lot of flexibility in that regard. So again, tempo marks, tempo alterations, and rehearsal marks are the only 3 categories for system texts. The other ones are staff-specific texts. So again, with technique text, for example, if you place the element on the flute 1 staff, it's going to appear above the flute 1 staff in the score and in the part, and only on that staff. So these are more staff-specific expressions. All right, so that's the general rundown of the categories. So let's say I just double-clicked below the flute 1 part, so we're going to add, let's say, this expressive text agitato, and you see that it gets put below. Now again, if I had chosen a technique text, it doesn't matter where I double-click, it's going to put this technique text above the staff, even though I clicked below it, if you saw that. So that's sort of the power of the default positioning of those texts. It doesn't necessarily matter where you click. And in fact, if I go to the bassoon part and I click right below the bassoon part and add a tempo mark, which, as I mentioned, is a system expression, and I choose grave here, you'll see that it doesn't get put on the bassoon part. It gets put above the top staff of the score, like it should, because that's a system text. It gets placed in a very specific spot in the system. All right, so that's how that works. So let's go over here to this 4th measure here, and you'll see I've got these hairpins, and there's a missing dynamic here, which I'm going to put in right now. So I'm going to double-click there, and I'm going to go to Dynamics, and I know that this is the SF marking that's missing, so I'll assign that. And you notice one thing about this score is that SF should actually go basically on every single staff right down this measure. And obviously I could go through and do it one by one, but that would get pretty tedious. Fortunately, Finale has some really cool tools that will allow you to expand the assignment of these expressions vertically, which I think is really handy and important to know about. So if you click the handle of that expression and right-click it, we'll get this contextual menu, and the very first option is Assign to All Staves. And this does have a shortcut for it, which is Command Return, but you can just choose that. And you'll see that SF marking will now appear on every single staff down the score, all in one shot, which is really handy. It will apply it to staffs that are empty as well, so you just have to be cautious of that, and you'll notice that the only staff that doesn't have notes is the triangle here, so in this case you'd actually have to find that and just select it and delete it. All right, so that is one way to do that. And again, the same thing, if you just select it and press Command Return, the same thing will happen. It will attach to all staffs. The option right below that, Assign to Staffs ... and the shortcut for that is Option Command Return, will give you this assignment list dialog box, and from here we can actually select all of the staffs that we want to assign this expression to. So let's say I wanted to assign it to just, let's say flute 1, oboe 1, and horn 1, just for whatever reason. I'm going to do that, and we click OK, and you'll see it only appear on those particular staffs. So that's kind of handy. And what's really neat is that we can create staff assignment lists this way too. So again, select it, Option Command Return. And now if I go in here and I choose New, it's going to empty those out, and from here I can name this. I'm going to call it Woodwinds, and I'm going to select flute 1, 2, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon, and click OK, and it will add those to those staffs as you would expect. And then if I wanted to, I could add a second one. So again, Option Command Return, and we're going to choose New again. We're going to call this All But Perk. All right, and you can choose the Select Check All Staves, and then go in here and uncheck timpani and triangle. And now I've created a new assignment list called all but perk, and it will apply to everything except the timpani and the triangle, which is sort of handy. And then what's really neat is that those lists will be there. So if you go back there, you can choose all but perk again, or you could choose woodwind, and you can add as many of these assignment lists as you want, and which is really handy as you're going. So that's another neat thing to know about, right? So that's how that works. And there's a couple more tricks to this, which I want to show you. I'm going to add that SF again to the oboe part. One of the things that I use a lot is this function with the option key and the up and down arrows. If you have a expression selected, like I have this SF marking selected, and hold down option and press down, it will add it to the staff directly below. You press down again, it will keep going, so forth. And so that's really handy. Or if you have that expression selected and you press option up, it will add it to the staff above, which is really handy. And this will work for multiple expressions, which is really cool. So if I select the SF and the piano marking together, and I choose option down, they'll both get copied, or up, and they'll both get copied up. So that's really a powerful thing to know about. And then finally, if you choose an expression, and if you have a extended keyboard, this will only work if you have an extended keyboard with a home and an end key, you can press option home, and it will add that expression from that point to the top of the staff. And if you have it selected and press option end, it will add it from that point all the way down to the bottom, which is kind of handy as well. Now, if you don't have an extended keyboard and you have that, just select that expression, and from the expression menu, we do have all 4 of these options available. The option up and option down option, which will add it to the staff above and below, as well as the copy expression to all staves above and all staves below, which would be the option home or the option end. All right. So that's a really nifty thing to know about. Those shortcuts alone will save you a lot of time adding expressions, particularly with dynamics. All right. So in this case, I've got my SF here, and really what I want to do is apply it to all. So I'm going to choose that very first thing I showed you, which happens to be command return. And you'll see that it appears everywhere. And again, the only place I don't want it is on the triangle. So just select it and delete it. Now let's talk about Metatools, because Metatools can be very important with expressions. So if I were to double click below this flute line, I'm just going to pull this expression selection dialog box up again. You'll notice that all of these elements, or a lot of these elements, will have either numbers or letters in the upper right-hand corner of the boxes here. And those numbers or letters represent the meta tool for that particular element. So you notice the dynamics are mostly using numbers, 1 through 9 plus 0, and then we have F for FP, G for FZ, H for SF, for example. And the way that these meta tools work, if I just cancel out of here, is you hold down that number or letter. So let's say I hold down 4 and single click. You don't have to double click when you do this. So just hold down 4 and single click, and you'll get a forte marking. If I were to hold down 5, which is mezzo forte, and single click, you'll get a mezzo forte, right? So this is really handy, and let me just show you that expression selection dialog box again. You have all of these meta tools available for dynamics, but there are also meta tools for some of these other elements, not so much in the tempos. We have one here, T for a tempo, E for cell, R for rit, etc. You can sort of go through and find these. And again, this is the default set in Finale, so these meta tools are already set up for you. And they're sort of scattered between some of these elements here, and you can use them. And what's really cool about these meta tools is that we can actually, if we entered an expression and we decided that that's the wrong expression, I entered a forte there. In order to change that to a mezzo forte, instead of deleting it and re-entering it, with it selected, all we have to do is double tap the appropriate meta tool. So from here, I'm just going to double click 5, and you'll see it change to mezzo forte, which is really kind of cool. If I double tap 7, it will change to the piano, etc. What's really neat about is that you can do this at a bunch at a time. So let's say I wanted to take these SF markings that I put in here all at once. I just sort of lasso selected all, 6 of them or 5 of them for the woodwinds. And if I double click 4, you'll see them all change to forte, which is really cool. Double click 5, And I happen to know that H is the SF, so that will reset that back to SF. All right. I'm going to list the common metatools that will come with the expression library right out of the box, hopefully in the video right about now. And you'll see what they are right here. But there are some unused metatool keys. And in fact, I have a list of them that I'm looking at right now, and they happen to be the letters A, B, I, J, K, N, U, V, X, and Y. Now, with these unused metatools, we can actually use those letters to program new ones. So, for example, if you wanted let's say, if you happen to use the solo text a lot in your score, you could assign that to a metatool. And the way to do that is just without being in that expression selection dialog box, or just in the expression tool itself, press Shift plus the letter that you want to program. So in this case, I'll press Shift A because that's unused. And what you do is just navigate to the one that you want. In this case, I said I wanted the solo marking to be the A. So I'll choose solo and click assign. Nothing will happen in your score. But now if you hold down A and click, you'll get your solo marking, right? And so what's really neat about this is that you can program these metatools as much as you want. In fact, any of the metatools that are already programmed, like for example, if you're not using, let's say, the arco and pits because you don't even have strings in your score, you can reassign O and P to different expressions that you might be using more, and it's just a matter of pressing Shift O, for example. And when you do that, if it is assigned to something, it will highlight it automatically just to show you that you've already got the O assigned to something. But if you choose Open, for example, and click Assign, it will reassign the O to the Open instead of the arco, which is kind of handy. All right. And if I go back, press Shift O again, now I can go back to the arco marking if I want. All right, so that's how you would program metatools. And as a tip, you can reprogram as you're going as well. From within the chart that you're working on, file to file. It just depends on what's in your score, what's needed at any given moment. If you've been working on the score for a while, and all of a sudden the one thing you haven't added is a bunch of legato markings or something, and if that doesn't have a metatool, just assign it to one, and then you can just add them very quickly that way. And then as soon as you're done with that, you can reprogram that letter to a different metatool as you need. So, use the metatools to your advantage, reprogram them as you're going, and it will save a lot of time when you use it like that. Now, one thing that you'll most definitely want to do almost right off the bat is create a lot of new expressions, because again, these expressions that come in the default document, there's a lot of them, but there's probably a bunch that you'll need that don't exist. So the way to do this, in my opinion, is really to find the category that you want it to appear in. And again, that may have to do with the font and the style. So if you wanted a text that was italicized, just make sure that you're choosing the expressive text, and also this will go below the staff. So it just depends on what type of text you want to add. And then if you're going to add a new expressive text, just at the bottom here, just choose Create Expressive Text, and you can type in whatever you want. Let's say loudly. All right, and click OK. Now you've just created a new expressive text called loudly, and it will go in there. The one thing about this is that the tempo marks specifically, I'm just going to show you a couple things here. You'll notice that some of these tempo marks have not only a text word, but also a quarter note equals value. This is a little bit tricky because the quarter note is a different font than the text. So if you were to choose Create Tempo Marks and create one from scratch, it would be a little bit difficult because you're going to have to know what the font and the font size for the quarter note is, and sort of switch midstream as you're typing, which is sort of a pain in the neck. The better way to do this, in my opinion, is to actually duplicate an existing tempo expression and edit it. So in this case, I'm going to choose Adagio, and I'm going to choose Duplicate here, and I'll get an exact duplicate, and I'm going to choose Edit. And from here, in this text field right here, we can just change just highlight the first word itself and type something new, for tempo, for example. And then if we want a different number, let's choose 67. And then we have a new tempo marking, that's tempo quarter equals 67. And incidentally, if you navigate over a little bit just to the right of the quarter note and press the period, you'll get a dotted quarter note that will work just fine. Or if you highlight the quarter note, this is just so you know how to do this, and press the H key, it will turn that into a half note. If you highlight it and press the Q, we'll turn it back to a quarter note, and E will be for eighth note. So that's sort of the quick way to create new tempo text. It's tricky with the tempos because the quarter notes is actually the engraver font, as you can see, is showing up right here, but the text itself is something else, Times New Roman bold. So that would be the quicker way to do that. And then you click OK, and now you have your new tempo text, tempo quarter equals 67. All right, so that's how you would do that. As far as deleting expressions go, it's fairly simple. If you have something selected and just press delete, it goes away. But there's one thing you should know about this, is that if you can also delete from the expression selection dialog box. So if I just double click, and I could really just go in here and delete any of these items. And if they're not used, like let's say, where was that expressive text that I added loudly? I deleted it from the score already. If you delete it here, it will just go away. However, if the marking exists in the score already, like this tempo quarter equals 67, and you try and delete that from the selection dialog box, you're going to get a warning that says that the element is in use in the score, and it will give you a couple of options of what to do. The second one, if you choose that, it will delete the element from the selection dialog box, but also from the score, so it will go away. But the first option will allow you to delete that item from the selection dialog box, but replace it with something else. So if you choose that and then choose select, you'll get another expression selection dialog box, which will allow you to replace that one you're deleting with something else. So in this case, I'm deleting this tempo quarter equals 67. I could replace it with the adagio 56. And press OK, and you'll see it go away from the expression selection dialog box. And when you cancel, you'll see that that tempo will get changed to that one that I replaced it with. So there's a couple options available to you when you're deleting expressions, and it's just sort of interesting to know how that works. And then finally, I did mention that there's a contextual menu here. I'm going to get into this a little bit more as we go on in the series, but I showed you the assign to all staffs and assign to staffs already. There's some other functions that I'm going to get into more depth coming up soon. But there's also, right off the bat, you might be interested in this show option, which will always be checked. And if you uncheck that, you'll see it sort of gray out. And now this expression will be there in the score, but it won't print. This is handy sometimes if you have an expression that has a specific playback functionality, but you don't necessarily want to see it. So just be aware that that option exists in the contextual menu show. And of course, the link and relinked into parts and everything, I'll definitely get to as we get going here. All right, so this has been sort of a long introduction to the expression tool, and hopefully you're sort of beginning to realize exactly how massive this expression tool expedition will be. So I hope this has been helpful, and come back and we'll start looking at some more things having to do with the expression tool. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.